Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with practical tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jen Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. When ChatGPT and other generative AI tools launched, a lot of people said the same thing. Writers and creatives are toast. AI can write better blog posts, better ad copy, better everything, but it turns out that the people saying that probably had it completely backwards. Today, I'm joined by Joe Laser, author of Amazon #1 release, Super Skill: Why Storytelling is the Superpower of the AI Age. Joe pioneered the content marketing industry as a founding team member at Contently and has spent the past 4 years leading marketing at 2 AI startups. His weekly newsletter on storytelling in the AI age reaches over 185,000 subscribers. Today, Joe's breaking down why storytelling is your superpower in the age of AI. While everyone else is racing to master prompts and technical tools, he'll show you why investing in your most human skill is the best way to set yourself apart and how to get better at it. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks for having me. Love that intro video. This is an extremely professional live stream. Also love the guts of just doing it live right
Love
here.
it.
Hopefully my dog doesn't go crazy during
That's
this
okay. We welcome dogs and relatives and all noise-making whatever to the show.
All right, that's good. He's looking calm right now, but he does get a little feisty if another dog goes down the hall. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this chat. I think that the question is on everyone's minds of how does my role and my job and my skill set evolve with AI, and how can we not just use it, but leverage it in the smartest way and get better at our jobs as a result. So this is a great angle to tackle, and I'm really excited to dig in.
Yeah, excited to get into it.
Awesome. So everyone thinks that AI is coming for writers and creatives first, and maybe there's some truth to that somewhere. But you are arguing the opposite, that AI is actually disrupting technical work faster. Can you walk us through what you're seeing happening and what people are getting wrong about AI and the future of work?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, I went through, I think, a lot of the same journey that a lot of people did, right? ChatGPT came out a few weeks before the birth of my son Max, and in that early light of fatherhood, I grew up obsessed with a couple things. The first was keeping my little boy Max alive. The second was generative AI, because everyone on LinkedIn was prophesizing that AI would replace writers and creators. You had these reports from McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, all saying that writers were toast, that AI would soon replace content and marketing teams. And as a journalist turned CMO who really built my programs around thought leadership and brand, I thought, oh my God, like I just bought a mortgage on this condo in Brooklyn, right? Like, was I going to be able to survive in my career? Was I toast? And I was really lucky at the time in that I was running marketing at this AI future of work startup called A Team. We just raised $60 million, growing really fast. I joined the founding team there to run the marketing function. And what we did was bring different AI and product and engineering talent together as teams using machine learning and AI to build innovative new products for companies. And so I essentially got to co-opt our marketing and thought leadership function to answer this question that I was just obsessed with, right? Which is, what skills were actually going to be most important in this next age of work? Because as a journalist, I was inherently really skeptical of the first narratives a lot of times that we hear about technology, right? We heard that social media was going to bring democracy across the world, that it was going to bring us together. We saw that the realities of social media have actually been much different. It's ripped us apart. And so as I started to really dig into this, right, I started talking to AI researchers, future of work leaders, corporate leaders. I started this generative AI salon series in downtown New York, where every month I would bring together some of the top minds in AI and in future of work research to really discuss how AI was transforming the landscape here. What I realized was that a couple of things were going to happen. And the first is that AI was going to enable so much more mediocre content to be produced, right? It was going to basically drive down the cost of creating mediocre content down to zero. But that in turn would drive down the value of that content as it become ubiquitous and also wrapped it into this sea of sameness. And that in turn would create a huge advantage for people who could tell truly differentiated, authentic human stories. And the second thing is talking to a lot of the AI developers and researchers at the lab, was that AI was much more likely to get really good at technical tasks like coding and data analysis than writing and storytelling. And that's simply because it's much easier to objectively define what is good code, right? The app runs, it works. For data analysis, the maths, it actually adds up, it's correct. A lot of the researchers that I've talked to have described the act of trying to quantify what great storytelling and content is as almost an absurd task with AI, right? Is it how many exclamation points there are? Is it how many commas there are? Our connection to writing and storytelling as a social technology is so subjective, right? There's a certain taste, there's a certain, je ne sais quoi that we can't quite quantify in AI systems. Also, just the way AI systems are trained to scale these LLMs, we've had to ingest so much slop, so much technical content, marketing content, literally the worst stuff that's on the internet, right? From child pornography to literal gibberish to scale up the language models enough to get to the level of intelligence that we have. So all of that converged to make it pretty clear that AI was not going to get as good at writing and storytelling as it was as those technical skills. And so when I started kind of pitching this and writing about this in 2023, everyone thought I was insane because that was very counter to the narrative at the time. But what we're seeing now, and I think it's a big reason that people have gravitated to my new book, Super Skill, is that we're seeing a lot of evidence of this in the economy, actually. So the number of job listings for storytellers on LinkedIn have doubled in the last year. Dan Roth, LinkedIn's editor in chief, the other day said that's something they've never seen in any other skill, that kind of rapid extension. We're seeing that the number of times that CEOs are mentioning storytelling on earnings calls have exploded over the last year, 469 times over the last year. We're seeing companies like OpenAI and Anthropic posting these storytelling and comms roles with over $500,000 in total comp. Anthropic has grown their comms team to over 80 people over the last year. By comparison, growth marketing only has one person at Anthropic, because companies are realizing that going out and just pumping the web with all of this AI generated slop doesn't actually work. It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't really help you in SEO anymore. Google will figure that out after a few months usually. And also kind of traditional search traffic is going away, right? And as AI makes it easier for us to kind of copy or replicate any platform, what becomes really important is the ability to tell a differentiated brand narrative that's going to help you stand out and build trust and loyalty with people. So we have all these factors now that are converging that's making storytelling this incredibly valuable skill at work.
Yeah. I love everything that you've said so far, and just that, like, the shift over time of that high volume of mediocre content is not doing anybody any favors.
Yep.
And in fact, all of the things that people were trying to get out of producing that content, like, search volume and stuff like that, it's actually working the opposite now as Google gets smarter and the algorithms change. And every time there's a core update that's prioritizing useful and unique content, if that content was generated from any of the generative AI tools, it's not getting prioritized there. So it's actually doing the opposite work. And having a higher volume of that kind of crappy content is like, it's not a numbers game. And having the right content and prioritizing stuff that is useful and is unique, the only way it can be unique is if it comes from your own experience and from your own knowledge and expertise. It can't come from something that's been trained by things that already exist out there in the space.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly well said. And it's hilarious to see these traffic graphs, right? Where it's like, oh, we're tricking Google, it's going up. We created 1,000 programmatic pages around these content clusters. And then it absolutely just tanks. And it's like you went
Totally.
through all this effort. You completely tanked your brand in the process by churning out all of this slop for what? Like 2 months of a cheap traffic surge that probably didn't convert into revenue anyway. It's such an absurd way for people to be running their marketing programs, but everyone's looking for these cheat codes with AI instead of doing the actual hard work of crafting a differentiated brand that people actually want to flock to.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you were talking about the sort of difference between the quantitative and qualitative there, like that the LLMs they are math. They are reading words as math. They are structuring sentences through mathematical, approaches. There's nothing sort of human or thoughtful about the reading of prompts or the creation of content there. And so that it checks out that things that are a little bit more quantitative and mathematical in nature are more objective and easier to replicate through the Gen AI tools. And you can even see it if you are a heavy user of any of these generative AI tools, which I highly recommend you do use and understand. You can spot the way that it structures sentences and the way that it communicates ideas is very mathematical and very identical. It's structured the same way every time. And so it does check out that actually that more creative and more like it just lacks soul. I'm just coming from a conference. I was at a conference this week and I got into a little bit of a heavy debate with someone who was talking about how AI is coming for art, right? And art in the sense of, creating like paintings and creating voiceover art in entertainment and things like that. And I'm like, I actually don't think it's going to come for any of that stuff because maybe it can generate something and it can create a song or a piece of art or something, but it lacks soul. And I don't think that that can be replicated. And I think that's some of what we're maybe talking about here with content marketing too.
Yeah, I think a lot of what makes art is that it comes from our unique human experience. It's not just the words on the page or the actual image that you're looking at, but it's the experience of the artist that led them to create that thing. That's what
Yeah.
makes it create meaning for us as human beings. I think it's very telling in the language that we use around AI, right? AI generated code is vibe coding. AI generated content is AI slop. Like as human beings, we don't want our content to and our stories to come from AI because it's a social technology for us. I think you also have to look at the incentive structure of an Anthropic or an OpenAI or Gemini and how the models are actually trained, which is that they want to be producing economically valuable work for companies. That's where the money is in AI. It's the only way you ever get to a point of justifying the training and the data center costs that go behind running these systems. And now, like, really great writing in art is like, it's a little bit weird. You kind of have to be a bit of a weirdo to pull that off. You have to do things that are risky and surprising. And these AI systems are trained to actually do the opposite, to produce very safe, solid corporate content, right? And right now they're doing a pretty good job of that. If you think about really, just generic, staid, safe corporate talk tracks, press releases, landing page copy, like it knows where to put all the gross little CTAs, where all the gross little CTAs should be. We don't have to really think about those things anymore. But when it comes to actually something that's going to move someone, that's going to make them feel something different, that's going to change their mind or perspective about the world, AI struggles to do that much more. And I think it's honestly fine for us to have this little bit of divide where there's still something that is inherently human. The other place that we don't talk about storytelling nearly enough, I think as marketers, we tend to think about all these things in terms of digital, right? And how it shows up online. But so much of where storytelling shows up at work is in the relationships that we build with other people. Like when you're in the boardroom, can you have a story about a customer where you can pivot and you can change the narrative in people's minds in that exact moment? When you're in front of the crowd, can you convince them and can you move them emotionally to feel a stronger bond with you and your company? And all of that oral storytelling, which is where our storytelling tradition as human beings started, right? It's what turned us from a mid-rate species into ultra social learning machines that rose to conquer the earth. This act of storytelling around the campfire, of bringing us together with our tribe mates, that's still really, really important. And so
Mm.
that's the part of storytelling that we also don't think about at work, but it's probably the most important part of storytelling at work is like, can you rally stakeholders around an idea? Can you cultivate this culture within your team where everyone's going to work together, where they're going to go a little bit harder, where they're going to give each other the benefit of the doubt? Like those are the things that actually make great companies and differentiate the winners and losers in the broader world of work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit deeper when we start talking a little more about storytelling. But before we go there, I want to take a step back and talk about some of the, the future work that we led with a little bit in the beginning, and sort of how to identify if your career or your role is at risk. And I know you have some diagnostic questions that you like to ask. Can you walk us through those and, you know, let's talk about how people can invest in new skills to make sure that they still have a job in the age of AI.
Yeah, I think you could basically simplify it down to one question, right? Is which is really looking at your workday and your value at your job. Is it tied to kind of tasks that you're completing, or is it tied to the relationships that you have with your colleagues and your customers? Because if we look at the longer arc of AI, it's hard to tell how much of knowledge work is going to be automated, but I think it's going to be a significant amount. I think that Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, he puts it at 50% over the next few years. I think that's a little bit high, just because so much of knowledge work isn't necessarily purely task based. But a lot of what we identify in our jobs is around that, right? So like I am the person who updates this metadata, like writes these landing pages. I manage this task tracker. I write this code. Is your job built around those tasks, which on the kind of broad 3-year arc of AI are very likely to be automated in some way? Or is the value in your job built around your ability to lead and inspire teams, to manage up, to rally stakeholders, to get on the same page, to go in the same direction? Is your value built around the relationship that you have with customers, right? And your ability to build trust with them? Those are the things that are going to be really hard for AI to replace. That relational work that powers a lot of what we actually do and what's truly valuable inside of companies. There's been someone tweeted the other day that the absolute last thing to be replaced inside of companies is going to be an enterprise sales rep. And I think that's kind of true, because so much of that
Mm.
role is built around people who can tell stories that build trust with buyers that are making this like huge purchase decision, right? This high consideration decision. So I think evaluating your role honestly and saying like, am I really positioning myself and deriving my value from the task that I'm doing or from the relationships that I have? And if you find that it's very task oriented, work to figure out how you can automate some of that stuff, especially the shallow work that's taking up your day, right? Checking email, responding to Slack, doing those kind of rote tasks that you could do while listening to a podcast or not fully mentally engaged. Start shifting to higher level strategic work and start thinking about where the value in your relationships exist within the business. Like if you're in finance, move from being the person who analyzes the spreadsheet, which Claude in Excel can do pretty damn well now, to the person who translates that data into a narrative that's going to help your executive team make smarter business decisions. That's kind of the fundamental shift that we all need to be making, and cultivating your storytelling skills will really help you do that, because storytelling is this super skill that makes us better at all those soft relational skills that will matter most in this next stage of work.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think something I heard it sort of in what you were saying, and I've been having this conversation a lot lately too, is like, don't wait for your job to get automated. You can automate the tasks in your day that are more tactical and more, that can be automated. And if you actually take ownership over creating those automations, you're not replacing yourself. You're adding so much more value to your role, because not only have you created efficiency for the business, but you've enabled that higher level of work like you're talking about. So it's not our job to just like sit around and wait for our jobs to get automated and then we can do higher level work. Like we can own that. And actually these generative AI tools make it really easy for you to build out those automations and those efficiency workflows to free ourselves up to do stuff that can't be done with AI.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about really what you're then doing with that time that you're freeing up,
Yeah.
because we've honestly been sabotaged the last 20 years at work by technology. If you look at the arc of the last 100 years, right, the slowest rate of productivity gains at work happened after the advent of high-speed internet and smartphones, because all this technology that was supposed to make us hyper productive actually just made us hyper. Microsoft study found that we're now distracted every 2 minutes by a ping or a meeting or a message at work. It then takes us 25 minutes to refocus on deep work every time that happens. And there's this phenomenon called attentional residue by this researcher, Sophie Leroy coined this phrase, where every time we switch a task, right, which we're constantly doing at work now, we don't just fully mentally move over. There's a little bit of that last task that's following us around like a hyperactive toddler saying, "What about me?"
Yeah.
And we have this then huge cognitive overload where we're never actually getting very much deep work done, which is where your real value comes at work, right? Doing that deep strategic work that's higher level, that's going to get you promoted. So, what we can do with AI is do this cognitive offloading on all of those, checking our messages, our emails, like just get co-working Claude to do that. That's one of the biggest unlocks that I've found for myself. Like just turn it into your EA, right? It's going to handle that stuff. Automate a lot of those shallow work tasks that like AI can do pretty well and doesn't really need to come from a human being. All that data analysis, all of the scraping of your customer comments around the web, anything that you do like that, right? Use AI to automate it. But then what are you going to do with that time that you freed up? And how you use AI in that next strategic work period is actually really, really important too, because the researchers have now identified this idea of a cognitive divide in AI research. Have you heard about this at
No.
all? So there's this cognitive divide between the two ways that people use AI at work. And it was really elucidated by this study by a researcher called Vivian Meng recently, where she did this study where you took a bunch of people from UC Berkeley and adults in SF, and you broke them into a bunch of different teams. And they were given the task of predicting the day's events as compared to how the broader market on Polymarket was able to predict those events. And what they found is there were people who were in the human only group who didn't use AI. They tended to not perform very well. They just based their predictions based on the last piece of news that they read. The AI itself didn't perform very well. But also, most humans using AI, about 90% of them, also didn't perform well because they did one of two things in how they used AI. First, they just asked the AI what it thought, right, and submitted those answers. And it because the AI itself wasn't performing very well, that didn't perform well either. The other group just asked AI to reinforce and give evidence to what its instinct was, right? And the AI is inherently sycophantic, so it would just give it a bunch of research and information that backed up the angle that it already wanted to
Mm.
put out. So those people didn't perform well. But there was one group of 5 to 10% people using AI who actually performed much, much better. And that's people who were extremely active users with the AI, and they exhibited a lot of intellectual humility. In that, when they had a strong intuition about it, they would ask the AI to come up with counter arguments. When the AI was really certain about something, they would push back and they would question it and they would ask it to take the other side. And they're in this push and pull where they're treating AI like a sort of intellectual partner. And that's where we see that we actually get the most out of AI. And those people way outperformed everyone else in the study. Because consistently we see that when we're passive users of AI, when we just accept its answer, right, on strategic work, send that off to our colleagues, parts of our brain literally shut off. MIT found we had a 55% reduction in neural connectivity and engagement when using AI this way. Or when we just ask it to be sycophantic and back up what we already think, right? We're also not getting very many gains. But when we treat AI as this real intellectual partner and are really active in our strategic work that we're doing with the tools, we can unlock an entirely new level of execution and innovation. So I think that's one of the most fascinating keys about then, okay, I've freed up all this time with AI. What do I do with it? Right. And that's how you can use AI to actually unlock a different level of strategic work for you in your role.
That's such an interesting approach. And I'm like sort of racking my brain looking back at like some conversations that I've had with AI that have felt really productive, where you're kind of questioning it over and over again. Are you sure? Well, where did you find that? And well, I'm still not convinced that I should do this thing or whatever. And you get so much more out of it because if you just kind of go and say, hey, what do you think of this? I'm sure everybody has seen the memes online that like somewhere Claude is telling the dumbest person, you're exactly right. And that's what's happening, right?
Yeah, it's like, Jen, that's a brilliant angle.
Brilliant question.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe you thought of that. And then it's gonna, come up with a bunch of bullshit. Sometimes it'll just make up data, right? That
Yes.
supports your point because it wants to make you happy. Like that's how these things are programmed.
Yeah.
And then when you push back on it, it's like, you're totally right. Like you told me not to hallucinate and make up information, and I did. That's my bad.
Right.
Like I'm gonna start using Claude Speak, I think, just in like my day-to-day life.
Totally.
Like
Totally.
being
Yeah.
like, did you walk the dog? It's like, yes, I did. It's like you never took the dog out. It's like, you're right. I said I wouldn't lie about taking the dog out, but I totally did.
Yeah.
That's my bad.
You're right to push back on
Yeah,
that.
you're right to push back on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, yeah, it's very interesting, but, like, when you really do, like, challenge it and it doesn't even have to be business related stuff. I do find that, like, I get better at understanding how to use AI tools better when I use it for just stuff in my day-to-day life, right? I'm going on a vacation. What tours do I not need to miss? Well, what about this? Well, have you ever thought about that, right? Like just using it for anything will help you kind of understand. And what you're articulating, I think, is really interesting of like that pushback. And don't just say, here's a thing. What do you think? Because it's going to love it every time. Um, but actually have that using it as a thought partner. The way you described that, I think, is really interesting to really like, do a little bit of back and forth and don't just ask it to generate something for you. What you were saying about the predictions, right? Like, I think of creating content, and I think that's where all that high volume of AI slop, mediocre content comes from is people saying, write me an article about insert topic. And that's literal trash, right? You're just going to get all of some new form of something that already exists. But if you give it really smart inputs, maybe some of that oral storytelling like you were talking about, that's I'm very good at articulating my thoughts verbally. I'm not as strong of a writer by nature. I have to work harder to write. And so I'm happy to like record a 10 or 20 minute voice note about my thoughts on something and then say to an AI tool, can you just organize this, right, for me? And take me along a journey. Don't write something for me. Organize my thoughts. Is there a story here? And then I take the next step and then go, hey, what do you think of this? Now we're going, well, maybe that's the wrong answer. Maybe it's
Well,
like,
I don't know. Like,
what's missing or,
I'm interested by that process because for me, what I find is that writing about something is where I find like what I actually think about it. Like writing is
Mm,
thinking in this way. So it's where I really go down this process being like, oh, that's actually not quite the right idea or the right way to frame it. But I only really get at that from the painful process of that first draft versus when I'm just, going for a walk and like doing a brain dump to AI, right? It's then going to structure that in this way that's kind of polished enough that almost tricks me into thinking like that's good and that's like the right thing that I should be putting out there, right? But I missed that crucial step. And maybe that's just because the way that my brain works as a writer, right? That I
Yeah.
process that way. But I find that that can be like a little bit of a risk, at least for me personally, when I'm just brain dumping in there. And then it also works the other way. Like the times that I sound the smartest orally is because I am just talking about something that I've already written about, right? So
Mm.
I've ingested it in this way where it's really processed in my brain, and I understand the way to kind of like structure the points and certain lines that I'm going to hit, and it makes me better as an oral storyteller or you know talker in that boardroom. And the calling myself a talker is not great talking right now, but but you know what I mean, right? You kind
Yeah.
of get these uh, nice little moments and lines and points that you want to hit from the process of writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting and maybe it is something about the different ways people's brains work or maybe it is yeah, skill set. I like I can write if I'm forced into it. But I'm not a writer, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not in my nature. It doesn't come naturally to me. It's very hard for me to it depends actually. There are some maybe stories or thoughts that come to me very organically and I have to write them down. But if I am like, you have an hour to write something, there's nothing. There's nothing happening, right? It has to come to me and then I can write it. But
Mm,
I articulate, I'm a talker more than a writer.
yeah.
But I hear you on the risks of that. And it's something I'll look at too as I like, think about how to evolve my processes. Cause maybe there are things I'm missing, but I do find that I'm a verbal processor.
Mhm.
So even if I'm recording something that I'm talking, I might say, you know what, actually, that thing I said, that wasn't it. It's more like this, right? And if I can do that verbally, then get it into a written form, it gives me a starting point. Now, I personally am never like publishing the output of that, right? I'm then editing, like I'm a very good editor. I'm a very
Mhm.
good good at dialing things back because I tend to say more than needs to be written, if we had
Yeah.
more time, we would write shorter letters, but yeah, just that's sort of like, I guess my like either way, right? Whether you're kind of your natural skill set starts from writing or painting or talking or whatever it might be, whatever your process is, where AI comes into the process for me is as a partner, not as a creator or as somebody that's doing something for me, but as someone who I'm doing this sort of push and pull with to end up with the highest quality product at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah, I think as long as you're actively engaged in that way, that tends to be the most important thing.
Mhm.
But I think it's a really hard thing to do for anyone. Even if you know that, you have to be constantly reminding yourself of how you're supposed to be using AI because it's so seductive when AI is being wonderfully sycophantic towards you and telling you that your ideas are brilliant and reinforcing it because it's what we want to hear, right? And it's so easy to get into the trap of, oh wow, it just did this deep research report and it reinforced all of these things that I already thought, right? Because you'll go find the data around it, and worst comes to worst, it'll make it up a little bit for you. It'll fudge it, and so it just requires such a deep level of intellectual humility to think that maybe I'm not exactly right, right? And also a lot of effort to say I'm not just going to take this really great sounding argument that the AI is making, but I'm going to push back against it. And I'm actually going to spend that extra time with it. So I think one thing that I worry about is like, this is a really good concept, right? But like, how scalable is this at
Mm,
work inside of organizations? I think you can ask high performers to do it, but is this something that's realistic to ask everyone inside of an organization to
mm,
do? I think it just requires maybe a really deep cultural reinforcement inside the company of like, this is how we're going to use AI, which is not how most companies think about AI. I hear so many people now, especially over the last couple months, that are just going out there and they're telling me like they're literally being graded on the performance review by just how much they use
yeah,
AI. Like,
yeah,
not like the outcomes they're driving, not the work they're doing, just like, hey, you use ChatGPT a bunch, like you get a gold star, which is freaking insane. A terrible way to run a company, but
right,
it's everywhere because this is just one of the measures that I think we've decided to adopt for,
sure.
we're transforming with AI. It's just that people are using these things a lot and not asking how are they using it and what are they using it for.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting, and I think the scalability point is important. Right? Because you don't just wanna enable people if you're a leader and you have a big team, you don't wanna just enable people to use AI, you wanna enable people to use AI consistently and, in a way that's driving value for your business.
Yeah.
Um,
And like, no one is training their teams on AI.
I
Just
know,
to give like the other big
I
issue
know.
right now in there. Everyone that I talk to at a large company, like essentially they're getting very minimal real training with AI that maps to their use cases. They might get a technical training that's kind of poorly done, right, on how the tools actually work. And then we have this expectation that everyone is going to suddenly transform the way that they do their jobs using AI when their managers don't even know the use cases that they're supposed to be applying to it. And I think this is why a lot right now you see this huge disillusionment with workers around AI, where 68% are really anxious about it, according to a new section survey. Over two-thirds are saving essentially no time from AI, like
Mm,
3 hours or less right now. There's this crazy writer, the like enterprise AI platform founded by May Habib. They put out this really interesting survey a few weeks ago where they found that 75% of the executives they surveyed said that their AI strategy was just for show, which was wild to me. They actually admitted that, and about half said that they were massively disappointed with how AI adoption had gone so far. And yet, 69% of them said that they were secretly doing AI layoffs inside of the company anyway. So
oh my
everyone is just
gosh.
like barreling ahead with laying people off because of AI. Because I think so many CEOs are kind of in this, contest between each other to see who can lay off more folks. It's become this sense of pride around
Mm,
AI. And yet we don't actually have like the training and use cases and real metrics to measure AI adoption. So it worries me that we're kind of slipping into the worst AI timeline, which is that we don't get like the new job creation and the economic growth from AI, but yet we still have companies using this as an excuse to lay off a bunch more people really haphazardly because it's the cool thing to do.
mm,
And then we just see no economic growth that's actually going to drive the job creation that we need and the GDP growth to solve all the problems that are come when AI actually does start like truly replacing people in their roles. And a bunch of companies are just going to make poor decisions with their workers in the meantime, and people's lives are going to be disrupted.
yeah, and that makes the sort of internal storytelling, that stakeholder storytelling that you were talking about even more important, that, if you wanna preserve your job, because there are sort of frivolous layoffs happening potentially and, AI that is just for show, which just hurts
Yeah.
my brain a little bit, you have to be able to set yourself apart so that you're not victim to those things that are happening. And so I want to jump back into those storytelling techniques and sort of the importance of storytelling in business. And in your book you talk a lot about Dr. Paul Zach's neuroscience research and measuring how stories convince people to buy something or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's like happening in our brains when we hear a great story?
Sure, rapid fire
Yeah,
neuroscience lesson. Okay,
totally.
so the big thing that Dr. Zach's research had uncovered in the 2000s, which evolved a lot since then, is that stories make our brains synthesize this neurochemical called oxytocin that has been shown to be strongly tied to trust and connection. So, if I perform a trustworthy action like giving up resources to you, the oxytocin levels will spike both inside of my brain and yours, right? And for a long time, we thought that oxytocin was only produced through human to human interaction when mothers were pregnant or breastfeeding, when we perform those very strong giving actions, right? Like giving up resources to establish trust. But what his research found is that oxytocin actually spikes when we hear a great immersive story as well. So essentially, stories build trust, connection, empathy between people. There's this great hack, right, for building deeper connections. They also found that when we hear a great story, the neural activity in our brain increases fivefold. It's like someone's flipped on a switchboard, illuminating the city of our mind. And neuroscientists have this saying that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you think about it practically, like when we hear a great story, all those neurons are firing together and they're wiring together, which is why we're so much more likely to remember something when it's told to us through a story than a memo or fact sheet. If you think back in your life, right? Like, what are the things that you really know, that you really understand? Chances are they were delivered to you through narrative as opposed to just a bunch of bullet points on a page. Through the research that they did, they ended up getting this crazy grant from DARPA, the semi-secret agency inside the Department of Defense, which allowed them to develop this neuro tracker, essentially because the Army wanted to be able to figure out in the field in Afghanistan what stories and narratives and messages were influencing people the most. So they developed this neuro tracker that sits on your wrist, and it measures oxytocin production through the vagus nerve, and attention through different pulse and heart rate measures, and basically built an entire AI machine learning algorithm based on a lot of the previous work that they'd done to understand, when a story is really immersing someone. So they created this measure called immersion, which is like a combination of oxytocin production and attention signals. And then naturally, you want to monetize this. So they started working a lot with advertising agencies. And in studies with agencies like BBDO, they actually found that they were able to predict whether someone would buy something with an 83% accuracy based on how immersed they were with a story. So here we see also that stories make us remember, stories make us care, stories build trust, but stories also make us want to buy things, which is why stories are so impactful from a revenue perspective inside of companies. So it's a really fascinating science that I've spent the last 10 years reporting on and writing about. It's been heavily baked into both of my books, The Storytelling Edge and Super Skill. Have gotten the chance to conduct some neuroscience research of my own as well. And, really have gone down to drilling into the elements of stories too that are most trust building, that are most immersive, that are most memorable, which is a lot of what I write about in Super Scale, of how to apply that science of storytelling to building those deeper connections that are going to be so important in this next stage of work.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it's not, storytelling is not a buzzword, right? But it feels that way sometimes, the way that it's talked about. But the way you're talking about storytelling, this is physiological. This is science. This is, it has an impact on how our brains are working. And anyone who listens to the show will have heard me say before that, like, people don't buy the best products, they buy the ones that they understand the fastest. But that's really linked to story, right? It's the reason why people buy iPhones instead of maybe a phone that has a higher pixel in their camera, right? Like, I don't know how many pixels in the camera of my phone because I don't care. The features and the very specific kind of, product benefits don't register with me because there's no narrative there. There's no story, but there is a vibe and a reason to believe with an iPhone or an Apple product that isn't necessarily product and feature related, it's story related, right? And that's what inspires me to buy that product over another, right? And it's science. It's not just a fun thing to chat about.
Yeah, we think so much that our purchase decisions are rational, but what research consistently shows is that it's emotional decisions that we then rationalize after the fact and convince ourselves was rational. It's like the hardest thing to convince a lot of, CFOs and CTOs out there that believe that all of the decisions they're making are highly rational. It's part of the reason that I got to start geeking out so much on the science of storytelling to begin with, because as I was building Contently, I was like, all right, need a way to convince people who don't think like me that stories are impactful. Discovered Dr. Zach's research and went down this rabbit hole. Myself, someone who loves science, like I've always loved writing and reporting about science, but what stories actually do to our brains, right? That is, as you said, on a physiological level, is literally transforming what we think and how we feel.
Yeah, yeah, it's powerful, and it's that's the connection to, like, revenue growth and bottom line, and it's not just like, "Let's tell great stories because it's a nice thing to do."
Yeah.
It has a direct impact.
And I think, Ingle, that like we're not talking on enough with the kind of storytelling, you know, surge over the last couple months is a big reason behind this is that AI is destroying the product moat that a lot of companies have had over
Mm,
the last, couple of decades, right? Like you can vibe code up a lot of enterprise SaaS platforms that you're paying 150, $200,000 more for right now. So, and that's part of why, SaaS stocks have been tanking over the last few months. So in this environment, right, like what is your moat? I think brand and narrative and the relationship that you have with your customers becomes a much more important moat than product was before, because you can now people can go into Cursor or Replit and Cloud Code and spin up a copy of Monday or Notion or Salesforce or a lot of these platforms pretty quickly. So it's
mhm.
really changing the dynamic, right, of what it means to be a differentiated brand in whatever category you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just becomes that much more important. I keep going back to what you said earlier, the vibe coding versus AI slop. I love that. It's like it's so telling of how we're thinking about AI and where it can really have a lot of impact. Um, can we talk a little bit about the principles, the 15 principles in your book, across three stages: unlock, unleash, and upgrade? Can you walk us through a little bit of that framework and the foundational storytelling techniques that people need to master?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely not going to go into 15 principles
No.
here because I'd have you here all day. I'd basically just be reading an audiobook of super skill. But the way that I structured the book is in these three phases of unlock, unleash, upgrade, as you just said. And the idea is that really, if you want to master storytelling in the AI age, first we need to unlock our core storytelling superpowers. Like we're all born storytellers. So many people I talk to, they're like, "Oh, I'm not a storyteller," but we all are. Like my 3-year-old now is immersed in a world of story. Like he spends 98% of his life in Neverland, and so do all of his friends. As children, we learn about the world through stories. We are constantly telling each other stories. And as we grow older, we lose confidence in those abilities, but we all have them. They're very core to who we are as human beings, of how we evolved into such a dominant species. So the first part of the book is about tapping into those storytelling superpowers, breaking down the elements of great storytelling based on the neuroscience research that I've done. A few of those. One is relatability, so the ability to get someone to see themselves in the story that you're telling, speaking very specifically to their concerns and experiences, making that visceral ease, basically breaking down the barrier between you and your audience and hooking them in those first couple of seconds. Novelty, our brains are programmed to take notice when we see something new, right, in our environment. This is an evolutionary trait where it benefited us to notice when there was new food sources and threats around our tribe. And so we get this rush of dopamine when we see something new. Same thing happens if you introduce a novel idea, experience, scene, imagery in the stories that you're telling. It triggers this rush of dopamine in your audience's brain that makes them want to learn more. Tension, the element of storytelling that makes a story, right? Establishing that gap between what is and what could be, and playing on it constantly, right? Almost closing the gap and opening again, closing it, opening again. It's what makes us on the edge of our seat in our favorite rom-coms, action movies, thrillers, and it's something that basically anyone can leverage in their storytelling if you pay really close attention to how you're playing on that gap. And then the book goes into basically unleashing those storytelling superpowers in very specific work contexts, right? Leadership, sales, developing and articulating a big idea, building an audience. And then finally, the last section of the book is around upgrade, which is using AI in your storytelling practice. And the idea here is that you want to establish those core storytelling skills first and then layer AI on top of them. AI is very easy for anyone to learn. Like this idea that we need our kids learning AI in school is insane, because very intuitive. You can learn AI in 10 or 20 hours, but then how do you think about using it really thoughtfully, right? To maximize the storytelling skills that you have to bring stories to life that would have been impossible otherwise. George Lucas talks about this abuse cycle that we go through with new technology, because all storytelling is technological, right? The camera is technological. The pen, even with writing, is technological, right? And we tend to go through this cycle where a storytelling technology is abused at first, sound was abused, color was abused, motion picture was abused. And we start to figure things out, and then new innovative forms of storytelling emerge. And I think that's our opportunity right now, right? To use this technology really thoughtfully, where we're still making all the choices and decisions about the stories that we're telling, that's still coming from our core human experience, from the things that shaped us. But instead of there being a bunch of gatekeepers around some of the stories that you're able to tell through film and video and visually and audio, we can now use these tools to craft narratives and create experiences for our audience that we couldn't before. And I think there's even ways that we can really take charge and start to own our IP, right? And build communal storytelling experiences based on the work that we've done before, instead of just waiting for OpenAI and Claude and Gemini and all the different models to scrape that data and use it for themselves. So I think that's the way that all of us need to think about how we hone our storytelling skills, right? Is establishing those foundations, really practicing them in very specific work contexts. And I give a lot of frameworks and approaches you can take there, right? Different shapes of stories that you can tell. And then once we've established those core skills and we've gone into establishing that storytelling practice, then you use AI to really take things to the next level. And that's in studying the storytellers who are getting the most out of the AI age. Like that's the process that they go through.
Yeah. And if anyone's interested in all 15 principles, then you can go buy the book and go.
Yeah, it's here somewhere.
There you go.
Give a nice plug. Super skill. Are we doing live shopping on this live
Yes,
stream? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Get the
10 minutes only.
get Jen's affiliate link right now. Yeah, it's 30% off for the next 15 minutes.
Perfect. But well, when about a couple of weeks ago, we had Elle Grossenbacher on the show talking about product marketing and AI and product marketing. And she had a similar thing to say about how the best way to use AI in product marketing is to establish the foundational skill set of a product marketer and then layer the AI tools on top to take them to the next level. And so that seems to be a core theme across really like fill in the blank on any type of role or work that you want to do. You still need the foundations of understanding what makes good marketing, or what makes good content, what makes good story, what makes good product marketing foundations. And then you can use the tools. If you just try to go and use the tools to do something that you don't know how to do, there's no checking, there's no like validating that you've gotten the right answer, there's no editing and iterating like you talked about. So really understanding those core foundations is the only way you can make sure that the AI work that you're doing is going to work.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right on. And I think this is a intuitive thing that people who really spend a lot of time using these tools and think about using them the right way come to. It's like why I'm so distrustful of all of these AI bro growth hackers on there is like breaking, like AI can now do the work of like a $400 an hour, like social media manager. It's like, no, it can't. Like, shut the hell up.
I know. I get those ads on Instagram all the time of like,
Yeah.
the AI is now a XYZ number person team on,
Yeah.
this agency, whatever. And it's very attractive, right? It is very like it's good story. And it
You're just playing on people's fears though. Like that's what
yes.
they're doing. They're just absolutely playing on people's fears. Half of these people were hawking NFTs 4 years ago, right? And then just shifted to being AI growth hack bros. Comment AI hacks on my LinkedIn post. I'm going to DM you my, Notion database of 50 killer prompts that are going to transform the way you do your job. Like there's so many, there's so many con artists in this industry. It
So true.
makes me deeply sad and disturbed.
Yeah, it's so true. So try to stay away from that. If they're offering killer prompts, then that's a good signal that maybe it's not what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Can we like before we wrap up, just walk through a real world example? I know you write about Sam Altman and his mastery of storytelling. Yeah, just a real
Oh
world example
man,
where storytelling.
that is such a weird example that's aged from how it's aged from the book, right?
Yeah,
Because I was like
yeah.
writing this part in last fall, and I think you look at OpenAI's rise and their ability to create to such a huge lead early in the AI race. A lot of it comes down to Altman's real skill as a storyteller. A lot of people don't know this, but he was going to be a fiction writer originally, and
Mm,
then he kind of did his own analysis and realized he wouldn't make as big of an impact in the world. So he decided to go into computer science. But you see in him that he has a really innate ability to tell a great story. I think it's a lot of what's made him successful at Y Combinator and then OpenAI. But he was constantly in early days of OpenAI, like playing on the media so well, where he was alternating between telling this kind of like apocalyptic story of how AI was going to replace jobs, but then also this narrative about how open AI was going to come in and build AGI and save the world, right? And he was keeping himself constantly in the headline, creating this deep awareness of ChatGPT, of what it could do, a lot of user trust and loyalty. I'd say it's also a case study now over the last few months of how you can completely tank a lot of that equity that you've
mm,
built up, where OpenAI has, over the last year or so, really betrayed the core founding narrative of the company, right? It's of this nonprofit that was developing AI to keep it away from the corporate giants that would do weird and manipulative things with it and that could potentially use it for evil. Well, like OpenAI has had no real guiding light over the last year. They launched a grotesque TikTok for AI slop social network in Sora 2. They knowingly made ChatGPT more sycophantic, even though that they knew that it was leading to all of this mental illness and AI delusion within
mhm,
people. The Times reported on this um, because that they it would help them hit their user growth goals. And the most vivid example is that as soon as Anthropic pushed back on the Department of War, right, and said, "Hey, like, could you not use our technology for mass surveillance and killer robots?" OpenAI just swept in and took up that contract and had their
mhm,
own deal with the DoD. And so I think it's now an example of what happens when you don't actually stick true to the core narrative and why behind your company. Um, Anthropic now is probably the best example of really telling a story that is compelling and builds a lot of trust and loyalty with their audience. Like you look at Dario's essays and memos around why they were pushing back on the DoD
mhm,
and didn't want their technology used for mass surveillance and autonomous weapons and killer robots was incredibly clear and poignant. Their campaign, which I feel like I saw a million times last night watching the NBA playoffs, right? Around how Claude is your thinking partner, keep thinking. It's really
mhm,
brilliant because they're zeroing in on not a we're going to replace you narrative around work, but this is your technology, your partner who is going to help you solve the biggest problems, right? Their tagline of it's never been a worse time to be a problem. Just really brilliant storytelling that they do there. It's shot in this cinematic, really human way that you feel, right? So I think now for me, Anthropic would be the gold standard of this. And you can see the fact that they've invested in bringing really great storytellers inside of their company. 80 plus people over the last year, and paying those people, over $500,000 in total comp, because they understand that their moat in this industry is their ability to tell a story that makes people think positively of Anthropic in an environment where AI has a lower approval rate than Congress, only at 26% right now. And what we've seen in turn is that all of this, right, their ability to stick to their values, to that core founding story that they have around being the safety AI platform, right, the safety minded people who left OpenAI to start a competitor to get us to a safer future for AI. They've completely eaten OpenAI's lunch in the enterprise market, where
Mhm.
they've gone from, single digits, 3-4% of companies that were using OpenAI, or using Anthropic and Claude, to now it's like 30 something percent, just a few percentage points down from OpenAI. And if you look at total contract value, they're actually the leader of everyone, because they focus very much on a very clear use case, right? AI for work, for smarter thinking. We are the smart knowledge workers partner in AI, whereas OpenAI has been all over the place in betraying its values. So I think it highlights the need to really have substance to the story that you're telling, to back it up, right? To be constantly reinforcing that core narrative with your actions. Storytelling alone isn't going to save you.
Mm.
You actually need to live that story for people to believe it and to build that trust over the long term. So, OpenAI and Sam has been Icarus, flying too close to the sun, having this bravado that they don't actually have to stick to the core values that they originally went with, versus Dario and Anthropic has stuck to those values, and they've seen a huge benefit in their growth in the market as a result.
Yeah. And it just goes to show how quickly things are changing in this market specifically, whether it's in the product development and kind of new releases and the availability of this technology, or even in the story, right? That inconsistency in that story there, where that was a great case study in when you wrote the book a year or two ago. And here we are now going, well, maybe that inconsistency, like, it didn't last. And so we've got other gold standards to look at. And so I think it's really interesting just how rapid the change is in this space, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it still shows, right? One thing, which is that a decade ago, the number one business superpower was coding, but today it is storytelling. Like, the best founders are great storytellers. That's the key edge that you get at work. So that certainly hasn't changed. OpenAI has just kind of messed up their narrative by not
Right.
sticking to their actions. Sam is still really good at commanding attention. Like, that hasn't changed. He's still in the news damn near every day. He's really good at playing on it, but he's lost a little bit control of that narrative because he hasn't backed up what he's saying with what he does.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That consistency I think is really interesting, right? We can't just tell stories. They've got to
Yeah,
be.
yeah, like, people will realize that you're bullshitting them eventually.
That's right. Yeah, when we're talking about storytelling, we're not talking about making up stories.
Uh,
We're talking
which,
about a narrative, which
which
is a
is
little different.
what a lot of tech companies do. There's a lot of
That's
making
right.
it up, fake it till you make it.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough. This was such a fun conversation and really interesting way to think about kind of how to level up not only your adoption of AI, but your role in the world of AI. And for anyone who wants the nitty gritty on those different storytelling skills, please do make sure you're picking up Joe's book. But thank you for coming on today and talking to me.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll also plug the newsletter, the Substack, storytellingedge.substack.com. Give out lots of free stuff there. You can also get links to my podcasts, Art of the Zag, there as well. So if you're not ready to buy the book, you can subscribe to my newsletter, and I promise that you won't regret it.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening in today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get your podcasts and join us next time for more conversations that help demystify the complex